What's going on, everybody? Cleopas Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, we're going to be doing a quick comparison between the Samsung Galaxy A23 5G and the Samsung Galaxy A32 5G. Now before we go any further, as always, I do want to remind you to hit that subscribe button, and if you want to learn more about either of these phones individually, I will be linking to several other videos about them in the description, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But with that being said, let's get into it. So with the Samsung Galaxy A23 5G, we're getting a 6.6-inch 120Hz PLS LCD display with a 1080p resolution, a PPI of 400, an aspect ratio of 20:9, and an 82.5% screen-to-body ratio. With the Samsung Galaxy A32 5G, we're getting a 6.5-inch TFT display with a resolution of 720p, a PPI of 270, an aspect ratio of 20:9, and an 81.6% screen-to-body ratio. So both phones do have good displays for what they are, but in pretty much every way, the Samsung Galaxy A23 5G is significantly better. First of all, with a 1080p resolution, which tends to be a good thing when you're consuming a lot of content. In addition to this, at 6.6 inches versus 6.5, while it's not really a huge difference, the A23 5G is still technically larger, and with a 120Hz refresh rate versus a standard 60Hz, the movement on the screen with the A23 5G is going to be a little bit faster and smoother. So if you're doing something like watching a video or playing a game with a lot of motion on the screen, you will get a better experience with the A23 5G, and even when you're just using the phone in general, it will feel a little bit more premium. So overall, again, you're not really going to go wrong with the A32 5G, but if you are consuming a lot of content and you want the best display between the two, the A23 5G will be a better choice. Now for storage, the Samsung Galaxy A23 5G is getting 64GB of internal storage with microSD card expansion, and the A32 5G is getting 128GB with microSD card expansion as well. Now keep in mind, there is another version of the A32 5G that also only has 64GB. In fact, I feel like pretty much every version you get through a carrier is going to have only 64, but this version for whatever reason happens to have 128. I think it's an international version, and in that case, the international version of the A23 5G does have 128 as well. But if you are in the US and you get either phone through a carrier, you will be getting 64. So although the A32 5G has an advantage in this specific comparison, I'm not really going to count it, just because realistically, with either of these phones, you're probably only going to end up with 64 anyway. But that being said, 64GB still isn't really bad. Sure, it's not exactly ideal in my opinion, but for the average user, it should be at least acceptable. And again, both phones do have microSD card expansion as well, so if you want to offload stuff like photos and videos, for example, you always can. Now for security features, both phones do have face unlock, as well as fingerprint scanners right here on the power keys. Definitely a great spot for a fingerprint scanner, but starting with the A23 5G, let's give them a try. There we go, one more time. And there we go. And now for the A32 5G. There we go, one more time. And there we go. So as you can see there, both were real fast and responsive, no issues at all. And again, remember, both phones also do have face unlock, so if you want to use that instead, you always can. Now taking a look at the camera setups here, both phones have water drop notches for the front facing cameras. They look pretty much exactly the same. With the A23 5G, this camera is 8 megapixels, and with the A32 5G, this camera is 13. Now for the rear camera, the Samsung Galaxy A23 5G has a full quad camera setup with a 50 megapixel main camera, a 5 megapixel ultra wide camera, a 2 megapixel macro camera, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. With the A32 5G, we're getting a quad camera setup as well, with a 48 megapixel main camera, an 8 megapixel ultra wide camera, a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera, and a 5 megapixel macro camera. For video, the Samsung Galaxy A23 5G has a max recording quality of 1080p in both the rear and front cameras, and the A32 5G has a max recording quality of 4K in the rear camera and 1080p in the front. So in general, as far as features go, both phones have pretty much every camera feature you're going to find in a mid-range phone, including an ultra wide camera and a macro camera. So if you're taking a lot of photos and you want a wider variety of features, you're not going to go wrong with either of them. In addition to this, the photo quality is really almost the same. Neither phone is going to be quite as good as a higher end A-series phone like a Samsung Galaxy A53 5G for example, and nowhere near flagship level. But for more casual camera use, like if you want to take a couple nice photos for social media for example, either phone will get the job done. But that being said, I still would give the overall advantage slightly to the Samsung Galaxy A32 5G just because this phone can record 4K videos in the rear camera, and again the Samsung Galaxy A23 5G can only record in 1080p. But that being said, for the average user, unless you want to record 4K videos, for all your photo and video needs, you really won't go wrong with either phone. Now as far as RAM and processor go, the Samsung Galaxy A23 5G is getting 4GB of RAM with the Qualcomm Snapdragon 695 5G processor. With the Samsung Galaxy A32 5G, we're getting 6GB of RAM with the MediaTek Dimensity 720 5G processor. In general, they are around the same level in performance, and in my experience, for the average user, either phone is going to be plenty fast enough. But that being said, the A23 5G is a little bit faster, so if you're doing a lot of stuff like mobile gaming, for example, or you're just going to be on your phone a little bit more, you will be better off with the A23 5G. But again, for more casual users, for stuff like web browsing, social media, things like that, the A32 5G will be perfectly fine. Now that being said, I did run Geekbench 5 benchmark tests on both of these phones, and here are the scores right here. Again, as you can see, the A23 5G does have a bit of an advantage, maybe not really by much, especially when you compare these phones to higher end devices. Neither phone is going to be anywhere near flagship level, and honestly, when it comes to mid-range phones, I feel like there comes a certain point where they're pretty much going to be the same as far as performance goes. Sure, technically on paper, the A23 5G is a little bit faster, but in practice, you're probably not going to notice a whole lot. But that being said, of course, if you do want the faster phone between the two, the A23 5G obviously will be a better choice. But again, the A32 5G is still not slow by any means, and you most likely won't go wrong with this phone either. Now, both of these phones have 5000 mAh batteries, with the Samsung Galaxy A23 5G supporting 25W fast charging, and the A32 5G supporting 15W fast charging. So as far as battery life and longevity go, these phones have pretty much the largest battery you can get in a smartphone, at least in the US, so you can expect to get great battery life here. In addition to this, as far as the fast charging goes, there is a bit of a difference here, and if you do have a 25W fast charger, the Samsung Galaxy A23 5G will have an advantage. But that being said, in my experience, again, I've had the Samsung Galaxy A32 5G for quite a while now, and I have noticed the charging speeds on this phone are really good as well. Another thing to keep in mind that you probably knew already is that neither of these phones have wireless charging, so if that is a feature you want, you're probably going to want a higher end device. In addition to this, both phones do have NFC, so if you like to make contactless mobile payments using tap and pay, you will be able to do that with either of these phones. But that being said, I have heard of other variants of the A32 5G that for whatever reason don't have NFC, so if that feature is really important to you, then I would definitely be careful when buying this phone, or just go with the A23 5G, because as far as I know, every version of this phone does have NFC. But in conclusion, which of these devices is better? In general, I would say the Samsung Galaxy A23 5G is a better device in pretty much every way. Sure, they are really similar in a lot of ways, but honestly, the A23 5G, being a newer phone, has several key updated features the A32 5G just doesn't have. For example, in 2022, I feel like Samsung did improve their displays quite a bit, giving most of their mid-range phones higher resolutions and higher refresh rates, and honestly, the image on the A23 5G just looks better in general, so if you're consuming a lot of content, this is going to make a pretty big difference. In addition to this, the Samsung Galaxy A23 5G, while not being that much faster, is still the faster device, so if you're on your phone a lot, you are going to get a better experience. And another thing to keep in mind is that while both phones are going to have around 5 years of software support, the A23 5G, being a newer model, is going to get support for about a year longer. But that being said, the Samsung Galaxy A32 5G, for what it is, really is not a bad device either, and it can record 4K videos, so if that's something you want to do, definitely keep this in mind as well. Another thing you might end up thinking about at some point is that since the A32 5G is technically an older phone, you might get a better deal on it, but this really excludes carrier deals, which with the Samsung Galaxy A23 5G, there are a lot of good deals for right now. But in general, despite their differences, I do think both phones are really good devices. They do provide quite a bit of value for the money. Now again, if you want to learn more about either of them individually, I will be linking to several other videos about them in the description, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to follow Kalipis Tech on Twitter and Instagram. And as always, I will see you in the next video.